page Tzadik Zayin Amud Bet, page 97b on the bottom of the page, Mishnah. היה קורא בספר על האסקופה ונתגלגל הספר מידו, גוללו אצלו. Picture 344. He's sitting here and he hold the scroll here, and while he was reading from the book, it turns that the scroll just fell down this way, rolling hands to a public domain. So they said Gorelo Etzlo, so he can roll back to himself, because he have one piece that it's in his hand. So Rashi explain Ho'il ve'rosho echad biyado, since one part is in his hand, so he can roll it back. Now, the Rabbeinu Ovadia Mibartenura, the famous commentator on the Mishnah, he explained that in those days they used to have the scroll, all different scrolls, made in such a way, which is not only in nowadays we have the Sifrei Torah and the Megillah scroll. In those days, all the scrolls, all the writing was made out of scrolls. So while he was sitting there, it just happened that it fell from his hand. So they said, since the key is, it's not a violation of a biblical precept, so therefore he can roll it back. Now, later the Gemara go to the details. היה קורא בראש הגג ונתגלגל הספר מידו עד שלא הגיע ל10 טפחים, גוללו אצלו. משהגיע ל10 טפחים, הופכו על הכתב. If he sit for our scenario at the top of the roof, and then, top of the roof is a private domain, and then the book rolled from his hand. So they said, as long as he hold the book at the edge of the 10 handbreadth above public domain, which means he's not reaching the airspace of a public domain, so he can roll it back and bring it back to the roof. However, משהגיע ל10 טפחים הופכו על הכתב. But if he reach 10 handbreadth from the ground, which means it's a long scroll, he hold it and he's fell down. So if you reach the 10 handbreadth from the ground, then it's a different story. Why? Because we said that from the biblical concept, it's not a prohibition to carry from one domain to another, only if you physically carry from one domain to another, like we study in Tractate Shabbat, page 91. So therefore, a book that it's in a private domain, that one part is reach the public domain, and the other part it's by his hand in a private domain, it's not considering as something that it's rest in a public domain, and the Torah allow him to roll the book back to his hand and return to the top of the roll. Now, the whole idea is a rabbinic decree not to do it, and the reason for that, it's because maybe the entire item will fall to a different domain, and then you roll it back and carry. So if that happened, then it's turned already the biblical violation. So that's the reason why the rabbis put boundaries. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so basically they said of Chol HaKtav, you turn around, the writing part, it's toward the wall, the other part is toward the public domain. So it wait until after Shabbat, and Rashi explained that it's called derech bizayon. We don't want to put any level of denigration of a scroll need to treat it with kedusha, with a sacredness. So that's the reason why you reduce the level of bizayon, of denigrating the kedusha, the level of sanctity. Rabbi Yehuda אומר אפילו אין מסולק מן הארץ אלא כמלוא מחט גוללו אצלו. Rabbi Yehuda said even he reached the 10 handbreadth above public domain, and only the top, it's a very little, it's like using an extreme example, like the size of a needle. So they said he need to roll it back and he cannot bring it back to the roof. So Rashi explained that one part is already rests on the floor of a public domain. So רבי שמעון אומר אפילו בארץ עצמו גוללו אצלו שאין לך דבר משום שבות עומד בפני כתבי הקודש. So Rabbi Shimon said that even if the scroll on the ground itself, so he rolls it back to himself. Why? Because he said all this idea of shvut, of rabbinic decree, that it's the whole idea of putting a boundaries and making these rabbinic decrees is because it's important. But here you have the issue of rescuing a sacred writing and the component of the importance of Shabbat. So he said that the idea of sacred document supersedes any other things, and because it carries such a level of sanctity, such a kedusha, so he all that you shouldn't put any gzeira, any decree, and you can return the entire book in order to avoid again making it what?
Desecrating?
Yeah, desecrating of the document. Okay, so now we go to Gemara. Hai iskupa hechedame. What is the exact circumstance of this threshold? Ilema iskupa reshut hayachid vekama reshut harabim. So if you tell me here you need two items. One, you need to have full understanding of the threshold, and you need to understand what happened before the threshold. So he said, if you tell me the threshold is a private domain, which means that you have the 10 handbreadth high and the wide of 4 handbreadth by 4 handbreadth, that's the minimum, and at the front of that it's a public domain, so he can return the book to himself, even one part is in a public domain. Velo gazrina, which means when it's come to the sacred document, we supersedes any rabbinic decree. Dilma nafel ve'atela tuye, that maybe he will lose the book and he is going to carry from one domain to another, from domain of public to private. So meaning if it's totally fall to the floor, so it's in that sense it's not a biblical prohibition, because it's basically in his hand and it's running out. But it's a rabbinic decree that's called shvut, that maybe it's totally lost from his hand, and then if he loses it totally, he sees it on the floor, what are you going to do? Going to pick it up and carry from the private domain, from public domain to private domain, which is Isur D'Oraita, which is a violation of biblical law. 28. Mani Rabbi Shimoni דאמר כל דבר שהוא משום שבות אינו עומד בפני כתבי הקודש. Who is the one who said it? It's Rabbi Shimon. He said that when the Mishnah said that you can return the book from the public domain to the head of the roof, it's because anything that prohibited because the rabbinic decree to enhance the character of Shabbat as a day of rest, right? So he said it's not going to stand before Kitvei HaKodesh. meaning that it's a sacred document, you cannot desecrate it. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who hold that you cannot bring back the book from the ground of a public domain, so he cannot return it. Eima Seifa, let's go to the second clause of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda אומר, אפילו אין מסולק מן הארץ, אלא מלוא החוט גוללו אצלו. Rabbi Yehuda said, even that it's have a very small size, like very little, the size of chut, like little needle bread. From the ground, he rolls it back to himself. So now he said, Rabbi Shimon אומר, אפילו בארץ עצמה גוללו אצלו, even as in the floor, he can roll. רישא בסייפא רבי שמעון ומציאת רבי יהודה. You have three components of the Mishnah: first, middle, and end. First and the last clause of the Mishnah has to be Rabbi Shimon. Middle, Rabbi Yehuda. So it means that when we talk about the threshold, it's a question if Rabbi Shimon said it or not. So Ritva said that they tried to prove that Rabbi Shimon is the one, especially since you said that his other opinions, so it means that someone else beside Rabbi Shimon was involved. Amar Rav Yehuda, the Amorah, he explained, that's the order. The first, they're bringing the law of the threshold, and then they tell us that this law is under a disputation, and then they give the specification, which is the first part is Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, and then the Rabbi Shimon, the other Tana that hold yes. Rav Yehuda ein reisha v'seifa Rabbi Shimon metziat Rabbi Yehuda. That's the way the Ritva understand. Rabba Amar, Hacha biskupa anidreset askinan u'mishum bzion hakodesh ha'u Rabbanan. That here we're dealing with the threshold that is trodden upon by the public, and since we're afraid that it's going to be a desecration of that sacred document, so therefore the sages allow it to return to the threshold. In other words, Rabbi said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is a huge difference between great desecration to, in our language, small desecration. In a way, if the book coming out of the top of the roof, it's not the same desecration as he's standing at the entrance of the house that many people can step by on the book. So in other words, when it's a great desecration, Rabbi Yehuda allowed to return it. ומשום ביזיון כתבי הקודש ha'u Rabbanan eiti ve'abayei. Now, what we say, that if he is reading from the book while he was in a threshold, and part of the book rolled down, toch 400 golelo etzlo, if it's within the size of the 4 cubits, so he bring it to himself. Chutz le-4, if it's outside of the 4 cubits from the threshold, so he cannot return it. Ofcho al haktav, he turn around to the letters. V'i amar biskupa nidreset askinan, if you talk to me in the Mishnah, in the Braita, talking that people step on that, potentially step on that scroll, and therefore that's the reason that it's a great desecration. What's the difference between 4 cubits and not 4 cubits? And so sages should allow regardless. We talk about threshold that have the same rules as Carmelit, which means we're talking about 4 cubits by 4 cubits, and the heights is less than 10 handbreds. ורשות הרבים עוברת לפניה. So So the part of the book is at the front of the scroll, and this is the explanation of the Braita. Toch 400, if it's within 4 cubits from the threshold, the inafelu maitelei. So we are afraid that the book will fall from his hand, and then he return it to the threshold. Lo ateli de chiyuv chatat. If you return the book back, he will not reach the need to bring a sin offering. You remember we said many times that the idea of sin offering is usually for shogeg, for an unwittingly act, and here, since the prohibition of entering from public domain to Carmeli is only rabbinic, so therefore sharu leRabbanan chutz le400. So therefore the sages allow him to return to the threshold if he's still holding the scroll in his hand, but if it's running outside of the 4 cubits, chutz le400, the maitelei ateli de chiyuv chatat. So if it's running more than 4 cubits, so meaning the entire book, it's already out, and he returned it to the threshold, so basically he's going to do what? The book is down, so he's going to lift up the book and carry it 4 cubits in a public domain, and then he will stand before he enters to that domain. So because otherwise Gaon Yaakov said that you don't have akira and anacha, but here you have the uprooting and taking it, especially if he stand by, because the putting down happened in the Carmelit. Anyway, so they said lo sha'u leRabbanan. So the sages not allow. So meaning Abaye said that according to our view that there is a very big difference between a Torah commandments, violation of Torah commandments or not. Meaning, if the book running out of his hand from the top of the roof, that is a private domain, then you cannot return it, because then maybe the entire book will fall down, and then he violated Torah law. But if it's out of the entrance, miftan, inside the 4 cubits of a public domain, so he can return it, because in that sense, if something happened, he will not violate the Torah law. So the Gemara asks, Hachi toch 400 nami nigzar. If the book fell within the 4 cubits of the threshold, so they also put the decree that he should not return the book. Why? Dilma me'ayel mirshut harabim lershut hayachid. Why? Because may it happen that the entire book will fall out of his hand. So even by the Torah law, you can return from a public domain to the entrance, which is a Carmelit. But because you are concerned that it may happen that he returned totally to his house, especially if he stopped before that, and then he violated Torah law, so that's the reason why we said by chashash, by fear that he's going to violate Torah law of carrying from one domain to another, which is from the public domain to private domain, so therefore is a problem. That's the reason why they put the boundaries, the sages. V'chiteima, if you tell me that it's not any chashash, any concern of violation of Torah law, why? Kivan demafseket Carmelit leitlan ba, because the threshold is basically like a stop. It's like in between the two, between the public domain and private domain. So it's not considering a violation of Torah law. Ve'amar Rava, hama'avir chefetz mitchilat 4 lesof 4. If a person carries any item in a public domain from the 4 cubits to the end, ve'viro derech alav, and he lifted up that item above his hand, and he put it in a way above the 10 handbreadths from the ground, which is basically considering a mekom ptur, a place that it's exempt. So chayav. Why? Because they said if someone transfer an item toward a place that it's mekom ptur, that place that it's exempted place, he violated Torah law. Why? Because Rashi here explains that one of the 39 melachot is called hotza'ah, carries, and carries and transferring 4 cubits in a public domain. It's a combination of akira, uprooting, and hanacha, putting it in elsewhere. So therefore, that's the idea that the rabbi is concerned here. But the Tosfot said the problem is different. The person who stand in one location and transfer this item in his right side against his body to his left side at the end of the 4 cubits, so you may say that since he's using his body, it's considering it the same as you're putting down that item, and in a sense you cannot consider that as full-pledged a person that transfer 4 cubits. So therefore they say that you cannot treat it in that manner, that like transferring from mekom ptur to reshut arabim. But anyway, chayav, in a sense, it's a sin offering. So we said many times that in that general term, sin offering applied that something person does unwittingly. It wasn't intentional. It's called shogeg. So in that sense, we compare to that law. So now the Gemara said in conclusion, we have to say that this threshold is not involved any type of violation of Torah law. How? Hacha b'maya skinan. So the Gemara said the isku paruka. You have to say that here we're talking about extended threshold. So it's a long size between public domain to private domain. So meantime, while he's carried the scroll along the length of the threshold, what happened is that the hache vehache midkar. So you will remember not to bring it into the private domain, because remember it takes him a long time to go. So by putting it down, in other words, he stopped to read from the book or other purposes, it's considering like a time being that give him a chance to think and reconsider that it's a violation of law, and that's the reason why. Another way, no, you don't need to go there and say that it's extended threshold. So usually the sacred document, people read from them and then return it to the place. The Gon Yaakov took out the word umanachlu that put it there. But I want to show 2 points. One, it was said on behalf of the late Rav Kook, the great rabbi in Israel, that he was very makpid, he was very strict to make sure that when the students or people using the books return it to a place that they are before. Because think about it, if it's an active library and you're taking something and you're using it and you don't borrowing it, but then when you're done you leave it wherever you are, and then somebody else needs to find it and return it. So meanwhile there is someone who's looking for a book and he cannot find it because you left the book elsewhere. So he was very strict to put the big signs everywhere, and he was like very strong with that manner. That point one. But it's another thing They said that use here the statement. They said that stam kidvei kodesh, that regular sacred document writing, one is pursues and put them in their place. I remember we have a neighbor in our Haranof, it's in Yerushalayim, we used to live there. So they have a child who was absolutely ingenious, study and was beyond smart. So I always noticed, I told my wife, and we always laugh with that is a long stairs, and people usually don't use the elevator. And we always caught this little Yosef, this little boy, was walking with Gemara on the stairs, and reading the book or whatever he read, while he's walking on the stairs, floors and floors and floors, and he's reading the book. I don't think nowadays you see many kids like that.
No.
That's walking on the stairs, the long stairs, and reading. Anyway, so they said, "Veleichush dilma me'ayin behu birshut harabim." Maybe he's going to focus in and study while he's in the public domain. Ve'ay lehu behedya l'rshut hayachid. So he will not stand at the entrance, and he just bring it to a private domain. So, meaning after he lifted up, he's going to read it before he entered to his house. So they said, Hamami ben Azai, the Amar me'alech ke'omed dame. You remember Ben Azai in the Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot? Shimon ben Azai. So they said that someone who's walking has the same halachic category as standing, which means it's like we hold like he's standing each and every time separately. So the Gemara asks, "V'dilma zarek lo mizrak." So maybe you said that that is like you throw the scroll inside rather than to carry them by hand. Rabbi Yochanan modeh ben Azai bezorek. Rabbi Yochanan said that Ben Azai agreed that one who throw an object from public domain to private domain by way of an exempt domain is liable. So they said, Amar Rav Acha bar Rava, זאת אומרת, אין מזרקים כתבי הקודש. That is a special way of respect to this sacred document. So even during the week, we don't throw a sacred document. You treat it in a certain respect. So in conclusion, what we understand when we talk about the threshold, so we have here three different avenues. We have Rav Yehuda, we have Rabbah, and we have Abaye. Rav Yehuda, he said at the entrance it's considering a private domain. And the only idea that Rabbi Shimon will hold that we should not be concerned in a violation of Torah law apply if it's a fear of desecration of sacred document. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's prohibited. Rabbah said the entrance is in a private domain, but guess what? People are going to pass by and step on a sacred document. So Rabbi Yehuda said, look, if it's a fear that someone is desecrated such a sacred document, that's supersede anything else. Abaye said that there is a long and extended a Carmelite, or according to Ben Azai, it's a short one, but the book, the scroll, fall within the 4 cubits of the entrance. So therefore you don't have the rabbinic decree by returning the book, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda also allow, because we don't concern that he violated Torah law. So that's the 3 avenue. And Rabbi Shimon anyway, he says that it's allowed even it's exceeded more than 4 cubits. Now, Haya kore berosh hagag, if he was at the top of the roof, that's the Mishnah said, and the book, the scroll, come out of his hand. So they said, up to the 10 handbreadth, you can return it. But the minute they exceeded the 10 breadth, you have to turn around the writings in order to avoid a desecration. So the Gemara asks, who told you that you can turn around the sacred document on the face? והתניא כותבי ספרים תפילין מזוזות לא יתיר להם להפוך יראה על פניה אלא פורס עליה על הבגד. So think about it. You have a sofer, a scroll, like all these great Rabbanim, okay? We know them in Baltimore, right? So you see, they cannot write a scroll in one day, right? Take them long time. So what they do meanwhile? They just finish. The ink needs to be dry out. So what they do? You don't allow to have them turn around this sacred. You put some clothing, some towel, something on the top, and that's it, in order not to leave it open. So they said, Hatam efshar, hacha lo efshar. Over there, when you put a little clothing on the top of that, it's protecting the parchment. So therefore, you don't allow them to turn around to the face. In other words, if you don't have any clothing available, you do allow to turn it on his face. But other not. Why? Because think about it. There is a, which we call in English, the necessary evil, right? What is the least worst thing that happens? It says the worst thing that it's open and it's a tremendous desecration. So if you turn around, you turn the face around, it's in a way less. But he said, the Rashi explained, and the Meiri said that if you have a choice, it's better, it's preferable, it's advisable to take some nice clothing and put it at the top of the scroll and cover it, so it will not be a desecration. But not everyone hold that. The Tosfot here and the Rashba and the Ritva said that even you have some type of towel or clothing to put, the fear is that, imagine if it's a strong wind, like we have here so many times, those tornadoes, all right? So this clothing will fall to the public domain, and then you return it to the roof. So that's, they said you can't do it. But anyway, there is a long discussion. Some said it's only if you enter the street domain, but between rooms not. It's a long, between Aruch HaShulchan and Neshach and Reish Ayin Zayin, it's a long discussion. Anyway, my Rebbe used to always say that there is again, it's a little Kabbalistic. They said that one of the ministering angels, again, it's a little bit high above this discussion, just give you a vignette. So he said that leaving a book open, it's like a ministering angel that is called Shed. Shed is like, simply speaking, shed is like ghost. And its abbreviation is acronym of Shin, is Shomer and Dalet Daf. So they said, so that it's like created a forgetfulness if someone leave the books open and go out. So basically, if you need to use the bathroom or you need the other thing, you close the book or you put a sign, but you don't leave the books open. I knew from my great-grandfather was a Hasidic Rebbe. It's called Zidi Choi. It was a sect, or a Hasidic sect. So the story in the family goes that he was very makpid, he was very strict, that if some people in the Beit HaMidrash, they weren't feeling, they daven for a long time, they pray for a long time, etc. So people take off the tefillin, needs to use the bathroom. So he was very strict to cover them properly. Mm-hmm. And if he sees someone take off the tefillin and just leave it like that, he considered that as some type of desecration, the Rebbe. So again, that's a little bit above that, but the idea is not to leave the books open, not to leave the sacred document open as act of respect. So now we said that you should not return it to the roof, you just turn it, the face, to the writing. But what we say, that all of that is specifically if the sacred document reach the floor, but if not, Why you said that he should turn around to the face? Amarava bekotel meshupa. So he said, here we're talking about what? An inclined wall. So it means that the scroll did not reach the ground, it came to rest within the confines of the public domain. So they said, so he cannot return to the roof, that is a private domain. So, because otherwise it's הכנסה והוצאה, it's return. Again, I wish to have more time. There is a long discussion here among the Rishonim, what exactly happened in this kotel meshupa, in this inclined wall. אמר לאביי, במה יוקימת למתניתים? בכותל משופע? Tell me that the Mishnah speaks about what? Inclined wall? Eima seifa. Let's see the second clause of the Mishnah. רבי יהודה אומר, אפילו אינו מסולק מן הארץ אלא כמלוא החוט, גוללו אצלו. רבי יהודה said that even it's a small amount, like we said at the needle size. So you should return it. And remember what we said at the very early part, that in those days they used to have a scroll for everything, not only Torah. Everything was made a scroll. So it said, Vahanachle, the book is basically resting on the top of what? Of inclined wall that we treated as a public domain. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Mishnah speaks only if the book rests on the ground of a public domain, then you cannot return it, because if you return it, maybe the entire book will fall to the ground, but if it's hanging, he can return it. So he said, you have to be chasor mechasra ve'aketani. Every time we use chasor mechasra, meaning it's a feeling like the Mishnah was missing something, some word was missing there. B'meh dvarim amurim, when you tell me that it's a within 10 handbreadth from the ground of the public domain, you cannot return it to the roof. They speak about bekotel meshupa. That's specifically in a case of inclined wall. Ha'aval, however, 98b, bekotel sheno meshupa. So he said that you speak here about the regular wall, that it's not inclined. And what does that mean? So now we go to the specific distinctions. למעלה משלושה גוללו אצלו, למטה משלושה הופכו על הכתב. So if you have the 3 handbreadth from the ground, so he return it, he roll it back and return it to the roof. But if it's below than 3 handbreadth from the ground, so he cannot do it. Why? Because again, we said that maybe the entire book will fall from his hand, and basically we treated any book that is hanging a less than 3 handbreadth, it's considering in halacha the same as it rests on the floor. So therefore, so it's since it's considering the same as halacha of hanacha, the same as it's in the floor, he has to turn around of chol aktav. He must turn it face down and to the writing, in order to avoid a desecration of the Torah. It's called it's halacha leMoshe Sinai. That's halacha we receive from Moshe Sinai, and we discussed it many times. We discuss is the lavud, that it's considering lavud. The Gemara said in Shabbat 97 that it's as michta, that it's like the same as floor itself if it's within the domain of 3 handbreadth. רבי יהודה אומר, אפילו אינו מסולק מן הארץ, דבעינן הנחה על גבי משהו. So, meaning that in order to treat it as hanacha, it has to be on something. It's not just hanging. So if it's below than 3 handbreadth, it has to be supported or be on the ground of something. So the Gemara asks, ve'ela adam הרב השלושה לרבנן צריך הנחה. That according to the sages, if you have any item that is below than 3 handbreadth from the ground, you have to have some type of resting spot. Leima ketanai amra lishmata. So maybe what Rava said is depend upon the Tanaic disputation, and he hold according to Rabbi Yehuda against Tanakama. So they said, because the Tanakama, the first one, forbids to return the book if it's below than 300, because maybe he will return it when it's fallen on the ground and he violated what we said earlier, transferring domains. Elakula Rabbi Yehuda, you have to say that all follow Rabbi Yehuda. V'chasur mechasra, again, something missing. V'hachik tana. במה דברים רואים בכותל משופע? You have to say that speak about what? Inclined wall. So and the book is on that, resting on that inclining spot. אבל בכותל שאינו משופע, but it's a standing wall that it's not inclined, and the top of the book it's up in the airspace, אפילו פחות משלושה טפחים גוללו אצלו, even is below than 300, he returned to him. שרבי יהודה אומר אפילו אינו מסולק בין הארץ אלא מלוא החוט. רבי יהודה said even if the scroll is removed, only in our exaggerated language it says needle breadth from the ground, גוללו אצלו, he roll it back to himself. So my tama, what's the reason? Says דבעינן הנחה על גבי משהו, that when you put this chefetz, this item, require to rest at the top of some surface. So if the scroll is not actually the ground, it's not considered at rest, even if it's less than 300 breadth from the ground. So it means that what Rava said is something that it's agreeable, and no one disagree in a Mishnah. Next. משנה, זיז שלפני החלום, נותנים עליו ונוטלים ממנו בשבת. If you have a ledge in front of a window, so you have to remember that it's 4x4 handbreadth and is above the ground 10 handbreadth, so one may place object upon it or remove them from it on Shabbat using the domain of the window. So it means that it's like part of the house. So we hold it the same as the Chorei Reshut HaYachid, that is a hole in a private domain, because if it's a private domain, if it's above 10 in breadth, above the ground, so considering it's a private domain, that's Bi'ur Halacha in Shinun Gimel explain it. But we go to halachot later. So the Gemara said, "Haiziz de mapik leicha." What exactly are you talking about when you speak about ledge? To where does it protrude? If you tell me that it's in the public domain, maybe you should be concerned that it maybe fall on the ground and it's going to carry it. אלא דמפיק לרשות היחיד. You have to say that this ledge is coming out of a private domain, for example, in a courtyard. So it's a pshita. So for sure you can go ahead and place an object on it and remove them. So the Gemara said, Amar Abaye, לעולם דמפיק לרשות הרבים. You have to say that he carry it to a public domain. You have to speak here that the situation is that he referred to a fragile utensils. So what happened with them, it's right away break. The minute it fell, it's over. So therefore, you don't concern that he may return them to the ledge. If you have ledge in front of the window that's coming out of public domain, נותנים עליו קערות וכוסות קיתוניות וצלוחיות. You can place on it bowls, cups, and small cups, and others call it צלוחיות. It's like those jars and bottles that usually it's made out of porcelain. הוא משתמש בכל הכותל, and he can use ledge along the entire length of the wall, עד 10 התחתונים, and up to where? Until the lower 10 breadth of the wall. So he said, but not if the ledge lower than that. So Rashi here explains, he said, כלומר, כל מקום שהוא בין סמוך לחלון מיד, בין מופלג ממנו הרבה. So I explain here in my book, ביורי הכלומר ברש"י על הש"ס, that based on the Rambam, chapter 15 in Hilchot Shabbat, halacha dalet, that Rashi here, unlike Tosfot Rosh and the Tosfot, hold that the last clause of the Mishnah apply to the entire the place, that makes no difference if it's highs or lows. Any place, as long as you have this ledge that it's within the lower 10 handbreadth, that's enough. So that's the reason I use Kelomar, but I keep saying that you should, if you want to read at length, you're very welcome to use the book. Anyway, so they said, V'im yesh ziz echad lemata imenu. But if there is one ledge below that, משתמש בו, you can use only that one, ובעליון אין משתמש בו אלא כנגד חלונו. But he said, but the top one, we use it only the ledge that it's with that window. And high ziz echidami, what is this ledge, top ledge? What's all about? Idelate be'arba'a, if you don't have the 4 handbreadth. So he said, מקום פטורו is the exempt area. אפילו כנגד חלונו למה להשתמש? Even against the window he shouldn't use it. Why? Because it's a very narrow ledge, and most, whatever you put there, it will fall right away. So it looks like, appear like someone who's throwing an item from private to public domain. So they said, basically, makom ptur, a place that it's exempt, that is one side is a private domain, the other spot is a public domain. So both people in the private and the public domain can put their items, whatever it is, there. But since it's so narrow area, then the sages said no, you cannot use it. For example, if he wants to put together something that he wants to carry on his shoulder. So they said here, ve'id be'arba'a bechulei hakotel lishtamesh. So if you tell me that they have a 4 handbreadth deep, let him use the ledge along the entire length of the ledge along the wall, and not only that small part against the window. So it means whatever you look at the Braita, it's a problem. So Amar Abaye said, Tachton de'it be'arba'a ve'elyon deleit be'arba'a. So Abaye said that this ledge, the bottom ledge, you have to say that they have 4 handbreadth. So you see here in a picture number 345, Meorot, they explain the lower one have 4 handbreadth, and then the top one is a 4 handbreadth. So this one you cannot use. So they said, וחלון משלימתו ל4, כנגד חלון, דחורי חלונו, דהי גיסא, ודהי גיסא אסור. So he said that the part on this side and the part of this side of the window are prohibited.
Because they're outside the window, they're not.
Yes, but
right
the rest the 4 handbreadth deep. And it's outside of this, yes.
Yeah, so it's less than 4 handbreadths and it's outside of the window.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And Rashi here explained, I explained in my book, B'Rak Lomar B'Rashi, Rashi here have a very important point. He said, Zavit, Klomar, Zavit Achalon Barchavato, Rashi said that it's not necessarily a whole between public and private domain. He's just speaking about all the halachot, dinei chorim, that you can add to make it 4. And again, please take your time if you want, you can read it in my book. Now we go to the Mishnah. עומד אדם ברשות היחיד ומטלטל ברשות הרבים. So the Mishnah said a person may stand in a private domain and move objects that are in a public domain. So, and we don't concern that he may be by mistake bring them into a private domain. He said, ברשות הרבים מטלטל ברשות היחיד בלבד שלא יציב. The opposite too. As long as he's not carry that item חוץ מ4 אמות, outside of the 4 cubits. לא יעמוד אדם ברשות היחיד וישתין ברשות הרבים, ברשות הרבים וישתין ברשות היחיד, וכן לא יירוק. So the Mishnah said that it's inappropriate for a person to stand in a private domain and urinate in a public domain, and vice versa. It's forbidden. And also not to speak from one domain to another. So, because it's basically, for our discussion, it's make no difference if you take an item and carry between 2 domains, or you just make an action like speeding between 2 domains. It's still considering moving something from one domain to another, and if he does that, he needs to bring a sin offering. They said, רבי יהודה אומר, אף מי שנתלה שרוקו בפיו, לא יהלך 400 עד שירוק. No, it means that even he have a speed in his mouth, not walk 4 cubits until he spit it out. So he will not carry it. And by the way, the Shulchan Aruch Orachaim Shinun said that the halacha is according to Rabbi Yehuda. So, and they said here, Matne la Rabbi Chanina bar Shlam, Yelechia bar Rav Kamei de Rav, Lo ya'amod adam b'rshut ha'yachid mitatel b'rshut harabim. Person should not stand in a private domain and carry to a public domain, and therefore he violated Torah law. Amar lei shavakt Rabbanan v'avad keRabbi Meir. So basically you abandon what the majority of opinion of the sages follow, only the one opinion of Rabbi Meir, and especially Rabbi Meir, he is strict. So in other words, if a person allowed to stand in one domain and carry that domain, is depend upon the disputation between the sages and Rabbi Meir. That's in the Mishnah we're going to study Mitzvah Shem in page 101. So here Rav Chinena teaches this Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir. So Rav said to him, why are you doing that? Why are you going by the extreme? And Rashi said that it's only one individual against everyone else. So why you go that way? 99. Who, meaning Rav Chinena, Savar, he hold me the Sefer Rabbi Meir, Shereisha Nami Rabbi Meir. Because the last clause of the Mishnah, which we're going to study in page 101, go by Rabbi Meir, it meant to say that maybe the first part is also. So the Gemara said, no, Veloi, Sefer Rabbi Meir, Reisha Rab v'Reisha Rabbanon. The last clause of the Mishnah go, yes, by Rabbi Meir, but the first one is not going by the sages. So, just a side note, usually what we said in the Mishnah, when you don't have the name, you go by Rabbi Meir. But here it was maybe a Hava Amina, that since usually go by Rabbi Meir, so the entire Mishnah is by Rabbi Meir. So the Ritva and also Tosfot said that no, that here it's an exception, that the first one is the sages, the last one is Rabbi Meir. But Tosfot bring also an opinion that is the opposite. But for our discussion, we'll go by the conclusion of the Gemara, which is the first clause, the first part of the Mishnah, you go by the sages, and the last one is by Rabbi Meir in this case. First halacha, Shulchan Aruch Orachaim 352, Sefer ala Iskupa. One is sitting on a threshold with a book scroll from his hand, and when the scroll roll out of his hand to the public domain, so he can roll it back. And we explained many times that it carry a special sacredness, the scroll. העבירו דרך עליו, one who is carrying an object 4 cubits in the public domain by carrying it above his head. So the Rambam in Ilchot Shabbat chapter 12 said that he's liable. That's basically follow the Rava's opinion. We also talk about Iskupa Aruka. Iskupa Aruka, so that's basically the Vilna Gaon. With regard to one who is reading a scroll while sitting on a threshold, and one end of it rolls out of his hand, if the other end remain in his hand, he may roll it back to himself, even if it rolls behind the 4 cubits. So that's basically the opinion of Rabbah. But Abaye answer that the long threshold is rejected, because the sages do not distinguish between different cases in the application of the decree. There is those like the Rama say that only a sacred writing, not other scroll, because as we said that in those days it was used always a scroll, but the Vilna Gaon, Har Shalom, and Shulchan Aruch Chaim and 352 said that we basically more lenient in all cases involving scrolls. En mezarkin kilvei HaKodesh. Shulchan Aruch Yoredea 282, very important. It is prohibited to throw the sacred writings that are in the Torah, in the Bible, and that prohibition applies to other sacred books as well. So we have Geniza, we put those sacred documents. We talk about La'afoch Yeriyah. You take the sheets and put it face down. A scribe is not permitted to turn the parchment of a Torah scroll face down when it's writing. Instead, he spread a cloth over it. It is also prohibited to turn over other sacred writing, and that's basically the Bach, Shulchan Aruch Yoredea 277. We speak about hanacha, a placement within toch shlosha, 300, for an object to be considered at rest with regard to the halachot of Shabbat. So the Rambam said in Chot Shabbat chapter 13, it must rest atop of surface. So this requirement applies even if it is hanging within 300 of the ground, like the lavud, and that's the Rabbah's opinion. And kotel meshupa, if one ends of a scroll rolls off the roof and rests in the incline of a wall 10 and breadth, kotel meshupa, above the ground, it's permitted to roll it back. If it's less than 10 and breadth of the ground, you must turn it face down. That's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 352. Now, tiltul bershut acheret. One may stand in one domain and move objects that are in another domain, provided that he does not carry them 4 cubits in a public domain. Now, one may not move any object he needs, as he might draw them to him, and that's the Rambam. That's the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 350. The Rambam hold that one is permitted to stand in one domain and move even utensils he needs, with the exception of utensil used for drinking in another domain. We talk about yerika. It's prohibited to stand in public domain and speed to urinate into a private domain, or vice versa. And the same halacha applies to Carmelite, and that's the Rosh. And also Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 350. The last halacha of today, it's speak about rak mirshut lereshut. We said that one who stands in a private domain and spits or urinates into a public domain, or vice versa, is basically the Rambam in Chot Shabbat chapter 13 said it's liable to bring in those days in the Beit HaMikdash a sin offering. That's basically opinion of Yosef, that in Mitzvah Hashem We're going to elaborate tomorrow.